Inter ea quae in profundis latent, solos unus dominus, tyrannimus. A cold breeze swept across the Atlantic coast and under the hem of my untucked shirt, making me shiver as I fumbled with the last match to light my cigarette. The sea has always been a part of me, though by size I've always been a part of it. When I was a boy, hearing those old familiar keys jingling as my father returned from another months-long expedition meant one thing only. We were going fishing. Now, in my aging years, my relationship with the great unknown has changed. What was once a trove of endless bounty now appears weathered and worn. Scars and sea foam dot the crashing waves, and I know they hold as much joy as pain. I gripped the cold metal railing of the SS Harbinger and finally drew that sweet air into my corrupted lungs. Things were changing faster than ever. New conservation laws restricted the size of vessels and corporations allowed to operate along the New England coast. The political sycophants and corporate nepotists would remain unaffected. They always do. But those rules tightened a noose around the old Harbinger's neck. As I leaned against the rusted rail, breathing in the brackish, charred air, I wondered if I was meant to go down with my ship. I watched the rain strike the water's surface in increasingly rapid drips and drops. Smoke billowed from the engines below decks, blending into the mass of black and gray on the horizon. A storm was approaching. I turned on my heels and headed back into the cabin to steer us toward shore. First came the winds, heavy and low, rocking the ship dangerously against the waves. I bit down on my cigarette as I descended into the engine room. Coal was scarce, but enough to get us back to shore. I shoveled some into the hopper and felt the engines roar back to life from their slumber. Back on the main deck, the ship rocked furiously. Sheets of rain pelted down, drenching everything, and I staggered to the mast to scan for danger. The Harbinger was too big for one man to handle, but stubbornness and poverty had compelled me to release my crew. Suddenly, the vessel heaved violently as a massive wave slammed into it, tilting us hard to starboard. I clutched the rail, my feet slipping beneath me. Then a thunderous crack echoed behind me, and I glanced back just in time to see a chunk of the smokestack plummeting toward me. I yelped, felt a hard blow, and blackness engulfed me. Doldrums. Peace, quiet, and doldrums greeted me when I awoke. I had emerged from a violent storm into haunting silence. Gentle waves lapped rhythmically against the side of the Harbinger, while scavenger gulls called and responded as they encircled the wreckage. A slow trickle of blood poured from my temple, fading orange in the brine that covered the deck. My lips were pulled tight and cracked, my mouth coated in the taste of rust and sea foam. Veiny tendrils of kelp wrapped around my leg and the ship, and as I regained consciousness, an overwhelming urge gripped me to expel the contents of my lungs. I coughed hard, spewing salt and sand, every inch of my body aching in return. My head throbbed especially with the movement. I pushed myself up into a sitting position and examined the destruction surrounding me. The Harbinger was my inheritance, my rite of passage into a long line of seaworthy Henriksons. My grandfather had been a sailor. Before him, I heard tales of men descended from pirates and privateers, men whose presence filled dank saloons with the musk of salt, sweat, and black powder. My father had been cursed with disorientation for their misdeeds, and so he never voyaged far beyond the rocky Atlantic shore. In my youth, I had wanted to be a sailor, to fulfill the promise of generations past, but my father was taken from me by the waves, and no good man should ever leave his mother without someone to care for her. In my 31st year, she too was taken, and I was left with no one to love but the old lady that carried me from trap to trap midst rocky waves and tempests fair. Now there was nothing left. The ship cracked and strained along its hull, the thorny crown replacing the stack. The missing pieces were nowhere to be found, and the vessel had long ceased its smoky breath. Exploring the engine room, I found it flooded, my remaining coal soaked through. Hope of returning home faded. I collapsed onto the flooded floor, heaving lumps of coal aimlessly against the metallic walls. I had no tears to shed, yet the taste of brine lingered on my cheeks still. I cursed the gods for this fate, and I cursed the sea for saving my life. When I finally returned to the main deck, I was shocked, my eyes opening to the island I'd missed in my tunnel vision. It was a timid thing, with a small rocky coastline, appearing ancient and weathered despite its calm setting. The landmass was probably less than a mile long, and the edge I docked against was barely wide enough to halt the Harbinger's course. However, a noticeable outcropping of rocks protruded from the ground like a corpse might protrude from an ill-fitted grave. Fingers of brindled sand and claystone stretched upward toward the heavens, and I thought I could see a shallow opening shielded from the judging sun above. I scavenged through the ship's belongings, grabbing a pole and a pail before disembarking and marching toward the rock face. Upon reaching it, I found shade and rotting carrion, likely left as a snack by the flock of gulls circling the island. As I reached to inspect the carcass for edible meat, a strange breeze pushed up through the sand, chilling my fingertips. Digging into the sand at its source, I uncovered, to my surprise, an ornate grate, intricately detailed in queer bas-relief, depicting a nautical folk-tale of unknown origins. Tracing the delicate designs with my finger, I found them curiously rough and edged, despite their apparent age. I struggled to heave the grate open, finding it nearly impossible in my weakened state, even after digging it free from the sand. I recalled the ropes now serving only as decorations on the useless corpse of the Harbinger. Returning with the least disintegrated length, I tied a section around an opening in the grate, using the protruding cliff for leverage, and finally unsealed whatever lay buried beneath. A great, fetid wind rushed out of the open chasm, making me faint from the overwhelming stench of rot and decay that assaulted me. Considering my dire circumstances and the dwindling time before hunger overpowered my willpower, I resolved to explore the pit, no matter how grotesque it seemed. Peering into the void revealed no light from the bottom, save for the glinting walls shimmering eerily in the sunlight, mingled with some toxic coating. The hole descended at an odd angle, neither perpendicular to the island, nor slanted enough to climb in and out of. There was no ladder or rope for entry, and I suspected it was a deserted waste pit, more likely to sicken me than provide sustenance or shelter. I reclaimed the rope from its perch atop the cliff and tied it around my waist before slowly rappelling into the darkness below. The miasma within that place was worse than any I or anyone had ever encountered. A thick, palpable stench of ancient decay that plunged me into hallucination and delirium, turning my careful descent into a gruesome ordeal. My hands brushed against the viscous ichor coating the walls, and I felt a subtle yet sharp sting from its traces on my skin. I continued my slow descent into the depths. The pathway was far longer than anticipated, snaking through curious angles that made me question its construction. At each turn, I was certain my prepared rope couldn't possibly extend further. Yet it somehow did, carrying me deeper every time. By the time I reached the slick, uneven bottom, the stench was so unbearable that I could barely focus on staying conscious. Carcasses and bile dotted the floor, and the tunnel had widened into an impossibly vast cavern, much larger than the island above, yet unbreached by the ocean that must have covered it. The acrid tang of sewage and nautical refuse coated my mouth, but I pressed on toward the source of the smell, which seemed to be the origin of the inexplicable breeze blowing against me. In the main chamber of the cavern, I found a small, half-burned torch, and coaxed a flickering light from it. What it revealed was worse than I could have imagined. The floor was strewn with bones and cartilage from every conceivable creature. Among the carnage, I spotted remnants of a bull, a goat, an elephant seal, and a multitude of human corpses. These the most numerous by far, suggesting they were the primary refuse of whatever organization had used these tunnels as a dumping ground. I followed the smell as it snaked through chamber after chamber, memorizing the turns as best as I could, knowing my exit would be far more arduous than this descent into unknown depths. Some chambers held corpses of various sorts, but one particularly curious room contained a circle of naked men and women, their bodies decayed, yet eerily intact after many years. Tattoos and tribal paint covered every inch of their skin, with strange lacerations in horrific places that matched the ancient blood and debris caked under their fingernails. Most disturbing was their shared expression. Not agony, nor suffering, nor sadness, nor loss. Their mouths curled upward, jaws locked open, to reveal impossibly preserved gaping throats. Their eyes rolled back, making them appear overwhelmingly euphoric in death. I didn't linger there long, despite the unique wall markings and the mysterious pedestal at the center, unwilling to let my mind dwell on such inescapable horrors. I ventured through 3 or 4 more chambers of varying widths and heights, including one so narrow that I was forced to crawl, pulling myself forward with shuffling movements of my arms and legs. In that tight space, I could only take half-breaths, as it was too confined for my chest to expand fully. Eventually, I realized I had returned to the entrance. The room was now bathed in an eerie, dim red light emanating from no specific source. To my utter dismay, when I reached the cave's entrance that I had climbed down into, the rope, my intended escape, was utterly absent. My stomach knotted. There was no way the rope could have vanished, and no way I could have found the entrance via my route. Along my journey, I had descended into lower layers of the cavern several times without ascending, so I could not be at this height. Yet, it was equally impossible for this room, identical to the entrance in every perceivable way, to exist twice in the same system. I tried to retrace my steps, hoping the latter possibility was true. But when I reached the spot where I was certain the unforgettably narrow tunnel had been, there was only a solid wall, with no sign that any opening had ever existed. This realization shocked me. But before I could fully grasp its meaning, my thoughts were interrupted by a strange moaning and humming that reverberated through the chasm. The sounds, which I couldn't accurately describe as music, yet bore a rhythmic and ungodly repetition, resounded through the subterrane. The noise only intensified my fitful delirium, leaving me helpless to watch as my unconscious body pursued the cacophony source in eerie procession. Step after droning step, I marched toward the sound, through chasm and chamber, as an inexplicable crimson glow intensified around me. My head locked forward, but my eyes darted frantically in their sockets, seeking any explanation for this madness. Empty chambers gave way to those filled with strange hooded figures and even stranger inhuman beings, creatures defying all known taxonomy, unrecordable in any encyclopedia. They varied, each with subtle, grotesque imperfections, some bound at the neck to the hooded figures like hellish watchdogs, others crawling and slithering around the cave like snakes and lizards, and fiendish ones flapping great leathery tarps, parting the thick fog to hover over the grim procession. As I marched, I noticed I was joined by other lost souls, bent and broken bodies, some naked, others clad in tatters and rags. I could only imagine their march was as mindless as my own, and I surmised the collective terror building in the room as we proceeded. After some time, I could not tell how long. It might have been hours or days, though I had abandoned any hope of understanding my situation. I began to wonder just how deep into the earth this cave extended. Though I couldn't control my body's movements as it marched, I was acutely aware of the overwhelming exhaustion and anguish engulfing my body and spirit. My senses were overwhelmed by terrible stimuli. My head rang with the clanging of distant cymbals and the screeching of strange flutes and horns, while harpies and fools danced madly in my periphery. I looked at the faces of those watching us march. They were shadowed and vague, but I caught occasional grins and wild eyes. Their features seemed human, yet grotesquely disfigured, making each an abomination to humanity. Then I saw a face I recognized. Staring intently at me from one of the high rows of the congregation was a face I thought I would never witness again. He was a stooped man, leaning on one leg, monitoring the throngs as they passed him by. He did not dance or revel in the march, but watched on as if he was there to ensure the chaos did not overcome the suffocating order beneath it. I could not forget that face, memorized in my youth, for I knew I was not mistaken. The nose and eyes were the same ones I saw every time I gazed into a looking glass. The man watching me in that moment was none other than my own father, lost long ago to the cruelty of the sea. I wondered how such a thing could be possible, that he might have washed up on some shore just as I had, and that my fate might soon mirror his. But more than anything, I wished I could run up and greet him, though I couldn't even turn my face toward him. He saw me too, and I caught a subtle shock in his eyes as he quickly masked his surprise. He began marching alongside the crowd, staying ahead of the slow pace I was forced to endure. Words welled up inside me. I wanted to scream, to howl after him, to beg for any way to end my suffering, but my lips would not part. I watched as he turned his cloak away from me, stopping to discuss something with another strange figure who only nodded in return. My eyes tried to follow him, but he slipped out of view, and a new pain formed in my chest. Marching for days or hours had inflicted great pain on me, but it paled compared to the agony of regaining my father, only to lose him again to the swarm. If I had been capable, I might have cried in that moment, but blood and bile were the only humors left within me. Suddenly, from deep within the chasm, I heard the tolling of a great bell. The sound reverberated through my core and shook the entire cavern. Stalactites crashed down, and the raucous throngs dispersed in frenzy. A sharp pain in my thigh made me wince and drop to my knees. A tremendous boon, as it meant I was no longer marching. Immediately, I whipped my head around to look for my father, but in the chaos, he was impossible to find. In the moments that followed, I witnessed a terrible scene unlike any I'd seen before, one I pray never to witness again. Men and women tore at one another, clawing skin and hair, gnashing teeth. Those who had marched in the line of unconscious prisoners ravenously devoured the still bleeding corpses of the throngs that had encircled us before. The cultists fought back, vicious and gleeful in turn, unleashing unspeakable beasts upon the pale, famished bodies. Blood and viscera spewed from the writhing mass, organs slid across the floor in frenzy, and evil was painted on every face. Amid the confusion, some had tried to escape in the direction whence we had been marching. They were quickly devoured by the winged fiends hovering above. Others had clambered forward toward the bell. I could not discern their fates, so this became my only viable option. I picked myself up and trotted forth, deeper into the gates of hell. Stumbling forward with knocking knees and trembling legs, I fumbled through the chasm. Everywhere the scene was the same, an impossible multitude of bodies ravaging one another like vultures and carrion, indistinguishable from one another. I don't know how I avoided the watchful gaze of the raptors and beasts. I can only guess that my determination to press on dissuaded them. After some time, I reached a chamber dominated by a vast lake of blood. Rivulets streamed from adjoining rooms and the void above, pooling into a central depression. No other entrances or exits existed, but a whirlpool swirled at the lake's heart, hinting that the blood drained elsewhere. With no other choice, I plunged into the viscous pool, feeling the current draw me toward the vortex before it yanked me down in a mighty surge beneath the crimson waves. I must have fainted in the dark descent, for when my eyes next opened, I was greeted by an impossible sight. Where I lay could not rightly be described as a cavern. It was not made by any hands of man, though in its ugly brilliance and intricate detail, I felt certain that what I witnessed could not have been natural. Where I had landed appeared more to me like an ancient city, older than Memphis, beginning to decay while Babylon was nothing more than sand and sky. The ground sloped downward in every direction away from me, and looking upward rather than a ceiling, I saw what appeared to be a sunless sky, dark except for the alien planets and constellations that bore no similarity to the sky I had gazed upon my whole life. The air tasted cold and metallic, laced with an indescribable sweetness riding upon the rot that floated by. Buildings surrounded me, strangely shaped and molded to confusing surfaces that bent and creased in odd corners. Beyond them lay twin seas of utter blackness, where awful magnificent ships docked at every available port. Ahead, beset on either side by rivers of blood, stretched a polished black stone path. Following it upward, my eyes fell upon a great temple of the same black stone, coated in layers of flesh and bone. The rivers flowed impossibly upward toward the grand entrance, where a pulsing glow emanated from within. I gathered myself and walked toward the temple. As I walked, the angles around me bent and shifted as if I were floating within an oddly shaped lens. New roads curved and formed on either side of me, stretching onward out of sight. The temple grew in magnitude, and by the time I reached the foot of the steps, I felt the gravity around me beginning to shift in impossible ways. The steps proceeded downward rather than upward as they should have, and I followed them to a pair of great metallic doors. I wondered briefly how I might open them, but there was no need, for the doors opened of their own accord to reveal the darkness within. I cannot recall exactly what happened after entering the temple, for time became an illusion and space confounded the remnants of reason in my mind. I don't remember stepping through the doors, nor can I piece together the lingering fragments of sensation into a coherent explanation. There was blood. Oh God, the blood. It didn't flow or drip as it should, but twisted into strange alien statues. It coated me. I can still feel it wrapping around my arms and throat, flowing within me, trying to mingle with the blood pumping through my veins. There was no light, yet somehow I perceived many things lingering in the chamber. The taste of ash and soot fills my mouth when I recall it, and salt is everywhere. Little black voids decorated the pillars and walls like gems that absorbed the surrounding energy rather than reflecting it. But most of all, I remember witnessing that terrible god resting in fitful slumber at the heart of the temple. I remember the sound of its breathing, the horrible chorus that resounded around me and shaped the very fabric of reality in which I existed. This God was not the God of Abraham, nor of Ishmael, nor the Hindus. I do not doubt that some still worship that thing, those who remember the old ways, who feel in their hearts the pull toward the unnatural and the abominable. I believe some of them were among the crowds that had lined the antechambers to the temple, but I cannot imagine why any man would worship so dreadful a creature as the one I saw. It was not a man, nor could man claim to have been made in its image. Its form was never consistent. As it slept, it shifted through various shapes, a writhing mass of black ichor, a sea of blood and hatred, a terrible dragon with green and golden scales. Yet it lingered in none long enough to truly embody them. I vividly recall the urgent desire to flee that place immediately, though my mesmerized core made it very difficult. It wasn't until I realized that the temple, the city, and perhaps even the cave and island itself were all extensions of this being that I knew I had to leave. I wondered where its spirit ended and reality began. But as I pondered, I couldn't recall a time when I hadn't sensed it in my life. I felt myself slipping into an unholy realization, one I didn't want to acknowledge, one that still lingers unbidden in my mind. After I escaped that place, in a manner I can't possibly recall, and they admitted me indefinitely to Brickhaven Asylum, that thought has stayed with me, even now as I write this. Though I cannot bear to repeat the idea that resounds constantly in my mind, it reverberates through all thoughts simultaneously. Perhaps there has been no better description than in the words of the blasphemous philosopher Shael ibn Hazar-Arachid from his translation of the Book of Many Names. There are great kingdoms which lie beyond, and greater still the depths that stretch beneath, and countless stars hold legions of their kind. But among the things that lurk within the deep, only one is Lord. Join us inside the void, listener, Tell us of your grave misfortunes on r/ancient malicious. Give us your gold, your treasures, your time. Become like us. Become one with us.